A very good morning, a good afternoon, good evening to all our guests out there. My name is Gary Theseira, and on behalf of Climate Governance Malaysia, it is a pleasure to welcome you to Conservation by Community Biosecurity in Antarctica. As you know, we at Climate Governance Malaysia are deeply concerned about the climate emergency that's ongoing. And in line with our mandate, we are working with the private sector, corporations, boards, to turn this corner to address climate change, both through mitigation actions, reducing the release of greenhouse gases, as well as strengthening resilience to the impacts, the many impacts of climate change. Now, in this regard, Antarctica is extremely important as one of the two major polar ice caps. Our civilization, Homo sapiens, 300,000 years worth, have been shaped by the presence of both of these ice caps, which have been around for many millions of years. The importance, however, is something that escapes many of us. If you look at my backdrop from where I am in our part of the world at the equator, we are used to receiving most of the solar energy. But as we know, for half the year, each of the poles sort of does without a lot of sunlight. And this difference in the receiving of solar radiation results in the thermal gradients that drive our climate systems and help move heat from where it's plentiful here at the equator to where there's less of it at the North and South Pole. Now, this evening here, at least in Malaysia, at our time, we have a number of extremely distinguished guests who will be helping us to unpack the importance of the significance of the role of Antarctica. And we hope that you will stay with us because we are certain that what they say is going to be extremely important. We'd like to welcome at the very outset our guest, His Excellency Manuel Jose Balaguer Salas, who is the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Argentine Republic to Malaysia. His Excellency is a career diplomat born in Buenos Aires in Argentina. He has law degrees from the National University of Buenos Aires and later entered the Foreign Service Institute of Argentina. He's been serving in Kuala Lumpur as Ambassador Designate of the Argentina Republic to Malaysia and Brunei Darussalam. And in addition to Spanish, which he obviously speaks, he speaks fluent English, French, and has knowledge of German as well. We welcome His Excellency because as a country far to the south with a permanent presence in Antarctica, His Excellency has a unique insight to some of the important treaties and agreements regarding the use and access to the continent of Antarctica. Excellency, it's a pleasure to welcome you. Do unmute yourself and take the floor. His Excellency.
Thank you very much, Gary. I don't know if you are hearing me okay.
Yes, we hear you.
I don't see I don't see my image, but I guess it's okay. It's fine. I'll start my video. Okay, I think I'm there. There I am. Okay, I can see myself. Well, very good afternoon to everyone, or morning, wherever you are in the world. If you're attending this webinar, allow me to start by thanking, of course, Tatin Seri Sunita Rajakumar and yourself, Gary, for this invitation to participate in this webinar, which is very interesting, as you mentioned, for my country, because we have an important presence. Argentina has a clear inclination towards Antarctica due to its history and continuous presence its close proximity and its scientific pursuits in the white continent. So it's very pertinent for us to be here today. Thank you so much. In Antarctica, I will start by saying I'm going to do a general presentation about the situation in Antarctica, the international agreements we have, the presence of my country, of course, there since the beginning of the scientific research in the continent. So in Antarctica, as I say, Argentina has played a significant role, and it is continuing to do so by preserving peace, scientific research, international cooperation, and environmental protection. We recognize the importance of Antarctica as a unique continent, as a natural heritage of great value for humanity, and as a region of great vulnerability that plays a fundamental role in global climate system. It is the region, as you may know, most affected by climate change. The responsibility, though, of countries to decrease global greenhouse gas emissions that lead to global warming is a real issue that must be addressed in climate forums. Antarctica activity began in the 19th century with various expeditions to the continent. However, a significant milestone occurred on February 22nd in 1904, almost more than 120 years ago, with the establishment of the Meteorology and Magnetic Observatory on Lori Island, South Orkney Islands. Argentina's uninterrupted presence in Antarctica began in what is considered to be the first permanent Antarctic base in the world. Over the next 4 decades, Argentina was the only country with a sustained and uninterrupted presence in the region. Over time, my country has established several Antarctic bases and made significant contributions to the Antarctic Treaty, particularly in the areas of biosecurity and conservation that have played a vital role in preserving the delicate ecosystems of the Antarctic region by implementing measures to prevent the introduction of non-native species and ensuring sustainable practices. Argentina's commitment to environmental protection in Antarctica is crucial for maintaining the continent's pristine environment for future generations. Currently, Argentina has 13 bases in Antarctica, which 7 of them are permanent and operate throughout the year. Another 6 that are temporary and open only during the summer Antarctic campaign. So this is a clear sign of our interest and our presence there. 13 bases Argentina has, mostly in the peninsula, the area which is close to our country, of course. As you know, the Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959 by 12 countries, including Argentina, is an international instrument that preserves the Antarctic continent for peace, science, international cooperation, and environmental protection. This treaty provides a framework to regulate the activity in the region and, in its Article 4, establishes a formula to safeguard sovereignty claims from 7 countries, including Argentina again. The treaty is an instrument open to signature by countries that demonstrate interest in conducting scientific research in Antarctica. Here, just mentioning Malaysia is a non-consultant party of the treaty, but is also interested and participates very actively in the activities and in the discussions. Currently, here we go. We are 59 signatory countries of the instrument. Argentina, along with 28 other countries, is a consultative party. This means that it has a voice and vote in the decision-making process on everything that happens in Antarctica. Furthermore, Argentina plays an active and prominent role in all of the forums that regulate the Antarctic activity at the international level. We carry out, of course, scientific research in Antarctica in collaboration with more than 20 countries. International cooperation is essential to carry out the numerous scientific activities on a continent with significant challenges in terms of science and logistics. In addition to the scientific and technical capabilities of Argentine researchers, our country contributes to the logistics by making its 13 Antarctic bases available to scientists from all over the world. This international collaboration also strengthens our national scientific activity multiplying initiatives that lead to greater knowledge and protection of Antarctica. In this sense, allow me to mention that we had a cooperation with Malaysia, with a Malaysian scientist went to Antarctica to one of our bases in Carlini in 2017 to do some projects. This was Wayan Supatra, I think he was his name, and he went. He stayed like 1 month in summer in Antarctica in the Argentine base Carlini. For Argentina, this type of cooperation is of utmost importance, since it not only represents a recognition of the quality of our national science, but also makes possible the compilation of scientific data that is fundamental for environmental protection and management of Antarctica. Peaceful use, scientific research, international cooperation, and preservation of environment in Antarctica are fundamental pillars of Argentina's foreign policy, and is the reason why our country collaborates closely with other institutions to join forces, generate and share knowledge, and thus contribute to our common good and that of future generations. The challenges cover geographical, logistical, and budgetary aspects. The region has an extreme and hostile climate, which constitutes a major test. In addition, it is required to provide logistic support in terms of transport, food, and medical care, among other needs, for the personnel who works at the 13 bases that Argentina has in Antarctica. Scientific research in Antarctica is essential to understanding environmental challenges such as climate change, through climate monitoring, the study of snow-melt glaciers, biodiversity, and historical climate records Argentina has taken since the mid of the 19th century. Argentina has contributed significantly to these efforts with continuous weather records since those days, providing valuable data for understanding environmental changes in the region and its impact worldwide. Argentina is also a signatory party of the protocol to the Antarctic Treaty on Environmental Protection, also known as the Madrid Protocol, which guarantees that all Antarctic activity is carried out with the utmost environmental care. This commitment is implemented through strict regulations, environmental impact assessments, management plans, training and awareness programs, as well as through international cooperation. The Argentine Antarctic Institute research topics cover biological, geological, paleontological, physical, chemical, climatic, environmental, and social issues. Together, these activities provide new knowledge that allows a better understanding of the origin of the Antarctic continent, the characteristics of the living organisms that inhabit it at present and in the past, of the natural forces and human-induced factors that affect ocean dynamics and atmosphere. For the Argentine Republic, as a country with a rich Antarctic tradition, it is a great honor and pride to have the headquarters of the Antarctic Treaty Secretariat in Buenos Aires, which began to operate in 2004. Furthermore, as it was mentioned by Gary, the city of Ushuaia, the south of Patagonia, is the closest gateway to Antarctica and has all the potential to become a high relevant Antarctic logistics center and hub, supporting all activities that take place on the Antarctic Peninsula, which include the passage of more than 90% of the Antarctic maritime tourism and the presence in that region of more than 30 bases from 17 different countries. Scientific activity is central to our Antarctic policy, placing our country at the vanguard in terms of scientific production on the wide continent. The Argentine scientific production in Antarctica is planned and executed by the Argentine Antarctic Institute, that also collaborates with national universities, foreign research centers, and with our foreign national Antarctic programs. We have cooperation agreements signed with more than 20 countries, including, but I'm not going to mention all of them, many countries, and at present, 28 scientific projects are being developed with 23 of these countries, which we have agreements with. I will just mention two examples of this kind of cooperation because it's interesting to see. The first one is a joint project with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Nutec Plastics is the EAEA flagship initiative to address the global challenge of plastic pollution, a program aimed to studying marine pollution by plastics that cover almost all the world's seas. Thanks to an agreement between the EAEA and Argentina signed this year, our country expanded this program also to Antarctica. The objective of this initiative is to facilitate scientific cooperation coordinated by Argentina through the National Antarctic Directorate and in accordance with the Antarctic Treaty System. This involves the organization of expert missions and activities necessary for sampling, performing analysis, and generating knowledge on data on the presence, distribution, and identification of microplastics in Antarctica. The second joint project I want to raise here is the one we have with Chile. Chile is a neighbor country. Both countries always have historically maintained a strategic relationship towards Antarctica issues and cooperation. Cooperation extends to such as the logistics, science, Antarctic diplomatic forums, research, environmental policy, among others. This special relationship is reflected in the regular meetings that are held every year with Chile, uninterruptedly since 2012, to discuss ways to strengthen cooperation in Antarctica. Combined naval operations, which the navies of Argentina and Chile carry out in Antarctic waters, are a good example of this cooperation. But most importantly, the joint proposal in the framework of the Commission of the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources to create a protected marine area in the Antarctic Peninsula and the south of the Scotia Arc, which is still waiting for approval. So both countries have presented this proposal to have a protected marine area in the Antarctic Peninsula. To conclude now, to ensure biosecurity in Antarctica, several measures are essential. You, of course, know them, but I could mention some of them now here. Quarantine protocols, decontamination procedures, strict waste management, educational campaigns, monitoring and surveillance, regulated tourism, and international cooperation. We could develop on each of these points many things to say, but I'm going to try to conclude now by saying that Argentina has demonstrated a solid commitment to the peaceful use of Antarctica, the promotion of science, international cooperation, and environmental protection, which of course includes biosecurity in the region, even before the signing of the Antarctic Treaty in 1959. This commitment is reflected in our permanent support to the Antarctic Treaty System, which has served as guarantor of these principles for more than 60 years. So with this, I conclude. I greet the panelists and the keynote speakers that are coming after my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Your Excellency, for giving us a very comprehensive idea of the nature of the treaties that governs the use of regulates the use of the white continent, as you so aptly call it, and for also the role that Argentina is playing in making the access, in ensuring access to the continent and ensuring the safety of the scientists from all the different countries with whom you are collaborating. We do owe countries like yourself, Argentina, and Chile a debt of gratitude in helping us out in collaborating with the research work that is ongoing. And so if there are any questions for His Excellency, once again, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. We shall as time permits, then direct the questions if you like. We'd like to move on. Thank you so very much, Excellency. Move on to the next distinguished guest we have this evening. He's Mr Yusuf Hashim, an explorer, a retired corporate leader, and a published photographer. Mr Hashim is an ex-corporate man. He took his life in a different direction, retired as a CEO of Shell, and has spent the last 20 years traveling off the beaten path, as it were, to countries exotic and unknown. He has a very interesting motto for his life. He says, your money is not your own until you spend it. He is among a very select group of individuals who have actually been fortunate enough to travel firsthand to the White Continent, and we really welcome his presence with us this evening. Mr Yusuf Hashim, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Theseira. I used to work for the oil and gas industry for 30 years. And it is my belief that government is not doing enough to compel industry participants of the oil and gas sector into making their products less environmentally destructive. I think it is the role of government, and government has to or should introduce more stringent regulations to control players who are causing this emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Because if they don't, and if you leave it to the industry players, they will not be as enthusiastic as they profess to be for example, introducing alternative products that are more environmentally friendly. But anyway, that is the past. Since retiring or quitting from the oil and gas industry the last 24, 25 years, I've had the privilege of actually driving to more than 125 countries throughout the world, across all the 6 continents, and where I couldn't drive, I sailed. And during my travel, I have seen many manifestations of how climate change has affected ordinary things in the world today. First of all, I must say that in the polar regions, IATA, or the Association of Antarctica Travel Operators, are extremely responsible people. I was with Hannah and Danny, leading a group of about almost 100 people over 2 months in January and December, 2-3 months ago, visiting Antarctica, the Malvinas, as well as South Georgia. And I think these tour operators are extremely responsible people. Would you believe that our ship captain stopped the ship in the middle of the Southern Ocean off Antarctica simply to retrieve a floating plastic cup that was inadvertently blown overboard by one of our participants? And that shows you the level of commitment people who operate these tours in Antarctica are towards preserving the sanctity and pristine beauty of Antarctica. And that was the first time. The second time, we saw 2 barrels floating in the water, no doubt carelessly discarded into the ocean by perhaps fishing operators. And again, for the second time, the captain stopped the ship, launched a Zodiac in, I would imagine, quite risky conditions, to instruct his crew to go and retrieve these 2 floating drums. So that shows the commitment that the tour operators and the ship operators have towards actually responsible tourism in Antarctica. In my travels to other parts of the world, to the Arctic, for example, one of the concerns of the Arctic is that the melting ice as a result of global warming is causing the hunting grounds of polar bears to be depleted. In other words, polar bears hunt seals on the floating ice. And statistics of polar experts says that there are only 20,000 polar bears left in the Arctic. And they say, many people say or claim that global warming is destroying the pack ice, and therefore polar bears are going to be extinct. But I would like to tell you that the biggest threat to polar bear extinction is not so much global warming, it is actually sports hunting by Canadians and Americans in their sector of the Arctic. Every year, they issue licenses to kill for sport 750 polar bears annually. At this rate of attrition, according to my good friend Dr. Morten Jorgensen, who is a polar scientist and specialist in polar bears, and Dr. Nikita Ozyanikov, who is the deputy director of the Russian Institute of Polar Bear Research. The reason for this anomaly, where everybody else, Russians and the Norwegians and the Finnish and the Swedish and those people whose countries abut the Arctic have stopped the killing of polar bears, the Americans are still doing it because they are arguing about the number of polar bears that are still in the world. Because many of the polar bears are congregating in the American and Canadian sector, so they claim there are more polar bears there, and they go about shooting these polar bears. Another distressing sight, I remember in the Arctic of Svalbard, I saw two Arctic reindeers, their horns locked together, because reindeers like to lock horns, fighting for mating rights. But one of the reindeer had a lump of fishing net on his antlers, and when they come together, they get stuck together, So they were struggling to free themselves. And when we saw this, we radioed the Svalbard Coast Guard to come and assist in separating these two reindeers. But they sent the helicopter and they arrived only about 3 hours later. And by that time, the two reindeers were so exhausted, one of them collapsed and drowned in the shallow waters where they were standing. So in the middle of nowhere, you see this pollution or rubbish discarded by fishing vessels, polystyrene boxes, nets, ropes, floats. These are causing considerable, damage to the ecosystem and also to the wildlife in the Arctic. In the Karakoram, the Hindu Kush, the Western Himalayas, for example, which houses some of the biggest glaciers outside the polar regions, I see glaciers receding. When I visit them about 20 years ago, they were in one place. The face of the glaciers was in one face. But recently, about 5 years ago, the same glacier has moved back about 200 meters away. So this is actually evident, very, very clearly evident in places like the northwestern frontier of Pakistan. And of course, in Svalbard, in Greenland, I've seen glaciers also receding about 2 or 3 kilometers from their positions from about 20, 30 years ago. And then I see also work in China. There are also positive efforts by governments. In China especially, if you travel in the Taklamakan Desert, the Chinese have built huge wind farms, turbine farms, to harness the energy of wind for electricity. On one track that I was driving, for about 15 to 20 kilometers, there were thousands of wind turbines, generating energy. The Chinese are also pioneering quite a lot of innovations in terms of arresting desertification. In other words, preventing the desert from extending its boundaries. And in Patagonia, I am impressed by the effort of the Argentine government allocating or reserving hundreds of thousands of hectares of the pampas for national parks. This man who owned the North Face brand, for example, donated a few 100,000 hectares to the government of Argentina to be converted into national parks. And similarly in Africa, in South Africa, Botswana, in Tanzania, in Kenya, the governments there have realized that the wildlife and the open spaces in Africa, it is logical, or it is clever to preserve them as animal sanctuaries, because the amount of money that the government and the country can earn from animal tourism or for tourists watching wildlife in Africa is so much more than if they were to convert the thing into whatever it is that they want to convert, you see. So I think worldwide, there are efforts being done to arrest global warming. But I was surprised when I was driving through the Amazon. The Amazon is no longer the huge carbon sink, the pristine forest that you and I might want to believe. In fact, in the middle of the Amazon, it is just grasslands. You know, the forests have been cleared for cattle to plant soybeans, and you look at the Amazon when you drive across the Amazon basin. Many areas are just like Europe. So, in fact, on certain periods when they're clearing the ground and burning the remnants of the forest after the timber has been extracted, the Amazon, in fact, has become a carbon positive contributor rather than a carbon sink. So these are some efforts that I can see when I was traveling, you know. And I think net the governments need to be a bit more aggressive in introducing legislation to compel industry to to arrest or do something about global warming and greenhouse gases. Sorry, I've probably overstepped my time. Dr. Theseira, back to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yusuf, for sharing your experiences. Indeed, many of us would envy your experiences, being able to travel as you have and see the things you've seen. I'm sure that all of us could sit and listen for a long time and be enthralled by all the experiences you've had. Thank you so much for taking the time to share them with us. Once again, the audience, if you have any questions for Yusuf, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. Let's move on to our keynote speaker this evening, Ms. Hannah Lawson, expedition leader, ornithologist, marine mammal guide, citizen science coordinator, and education coordinator. She has a love of bird life and marine mammals and spends her time between doing artwork in her studio in the UK and working as a wildlife guide, driving the zodiacs, leading expeditions, visits the Antarctic Peninsula annually during the austral summer, and then after that moves to the other end of the world, to the shorelines of the UK, Norway, and the Arctic, continuing her work, sketching, photographing, and learning about these important wildlife creatures. Ms. Lawson, the floor is yours. Do feel free to share your slides, and we look forward to a very interesting presentation from you. Hannah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm going to cover a little bit of the ground that we've already heard from His Excellency, the Ambassador. I'll sort of go over that quite quickly, but yeah, my experience is really 21 years in Antarctic tourism, educating visitors and yeah, talking with people. And yeah, I just wanted to sort of share sort of some of my experiences and thoughts about sort of being in Antarctica and how we can act, do the best that we can to educate people and also to preserve Antarctica and to maintain its biodiversity. And as His Excellency, the Ambassador already said, Antarctica is just so unique in the world with its governance. It's governed by the Antarctic Treaty. It's the main sort of thing of that is that it's for peaceful use and peace and science. It's governed just for peace and science, and it has no actual sort of permanent government from one nation. As was already said, there are people that have sort of stated claims to Antarctica, and hopefully you can see the map there, where it shows the kind of the peninsula region, which is the most visited region, is actually claimed by Argentina, Chile, and the United Kingdom for historical reasons. And then there's all these other little bits of the pie that have been claimed, but none of these claims are actually, they're all just held kind of in abeyance, that there's no actual the territory is just governed by the treaty, which is this Treaty of Nations, which is just astonishing. And one of the other things that happened in 1991, which is just amazing, is that all the treaty nations got together and they put on a complete embargo on any exploitation of Antarctica for sort of oil or for any chemical exploitation, or any mining exploitation, and that is to act for 50 years. So it's sort of only until 2041 that'll be revisited, and hopefully it'll be increased, and that protection will remain. And so the treaty nations get together and they discuss all the relative issues. In fact, there's actually a treaty meeting taking place right now. The annual meeting is happening as we speak. Yeah, it's just an astonishing thing, really, that these nations come together, and Antarctica is governed, by this cooperative way in the world. It's just unique in the world. But we've already talked about this. Okay. Sorry, and as part of the treaty, they have a lot of different protocols, and part of the tourism that happens in Antarctica is governed by the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators, and they take everything that the treaty takes to heart as well, and they're a kind of cooperative of all of the operators in Antarctica, and it is the IATO is the members, the operators, and all the people associated with Antarctic tourism, and they attend the Antarctic Treaty consultative meetings, and they represent and advocate for the future for safe and environmentally responsible tourism in Antarctica. And the idea is that it can show the world that the environment and education ambassadorship are at the very heart of what they do, and it could be a protocol that could be used worldwide as well. It's really amazing that although it's led by the industry, they advocate the best sort of policies for maintaining the environment in Antarctica, because it is so pristine, so precious. And there are more and more visitors coming. These are the visitor numbers for the 2022-23 season, and it was slightly more than 100,000 people visited, and most of those visited on small cruise ships, expedition cruise ships, which is what I work on. I've been, let's say, working for 21 years on small expedition cruise ships in Antarctica, and obviously an expedition to Antarctica and going there is such an incredible privilege. I don't take it lightly, being a leader there and working there. Everyone who goes there loves it, and is always astonished by it. Obviously seeing penguins up close. Most of the cruise ships are sort of ice strengthened, and they take the responsibility of being there very strongly. They have to follow the polar code, so they have to kind of maintain no use of the marine diesel. They don't use heavy fuel oil anymore. They don't put any waste into the environment. We take everything back with us. Everything south of 60 is deemed Antarctic waters. And we don't put any waste overboard. And all of the guide teams that go there take the protecting the Antarctic very, very seriously as well. So we have a sort of team who take people ashore, but we lead them on walks, and we keep them safe as well. We obviously keep the wildlife safe. And prior to us going ashore, before we even arrive into Antarctica, we give people a lot of information and we give them briefings. And I just thought I'd share a little bit of the sort of information that we give to people who visit Antarctica. And one of those is about introduced species, as His Excellency the Ambassador said. It's very important that we reduce any impact that we have, any human impact. So we take a lot of care preventing any introduction of diseases and non-native plants and seeds. And so we brief people about this, but we also do a practical cleaning of their gear as well. So we inspect and clean all of our clothing before we go there. Most of the guide team have dedicated clothes that they just take for Antarctica, so that we make sure that we're only using things in Antarctica. We take brand new things.
Hannah, we seem to have lost the audio. Can anyone confirm that?
Yeah, I can't hear Hannah either, and I suspect, looking at the image, that her system has frozen.
Yes, perhaps we can give her a minute to rejoin. Yeah, thank you, Wanyi, for confirming that. Let's try to give her a minute, perhaps, to rejoin us. Meanwhile, I note that we still don't have any questions in the Q&A box. So once again, like to welcome your questions there if you have any questions for any of the speakers thus far. Saras, are you in touch with Hannah?
Actually, she has just dropped the call.
Okay, let's give her a minute to try to rejoin.
Just to break in, Dr. Gary and everyone, this is Danny here. I've just heard from Han. She says she thinks her internet has gone.
Oh, all right, all right. Well, if you could just reply to her and let her know as and when she comes back, we'll be happy to pick up where she left off. Would you be all right, Danny, going on in the interim?
Yes, I'll just send a quick message to her and then I'll be with you.
Yes, absolutely. No, there's no rush. Yeah, thank you everyone for staying with us through these technical difficulties. Well, we'll give Danny Edmund a bit of time to.
Okay, I'm with you.
All right. While we wait for Hannah to come back and continue her slide presentation, I was actually supposed to introduce Mr. Danny Edmund after Hannah's presentation, which actually would mark the beginning then of the panel discussion with all our distinguished guests, including Danny Edmund, and later whom I'll introduce, Miss Laura Mony. But as we wait for, oh wait, is that?
Hannah's back.
Hannah's back. Let's see if she can get her audio working. Hannah, welcome back. We can see you, but we can't hear you yet.
Hang on, I'll send her another message.
Okay. Well, she's not speaking yet.
Gary, shall I take it on from where we got to with Hannah and see how we get on with that?
That will be fine. Absolutely.
Okay. In that case, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. This evening, this morning, middle of the night, wherever you happen to be around the world, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much indeed for the invitation. As I think we've already established, my name is Danny, and I've been working in Antarctica as an expedition team member and expedition leader for the last 20 years. I also worked at one of the research bases down there. I worked with the British Antarctic Survey at their base at Rothera, which is down on an island called Adelaide Island, and I spent 16 months living there. I was working as the boating officer, so I ran the boating operations there. When I'm on the ship, I tend to operate as the historian on board. And I really just wanted to give a little bit of historical perspective to Antarctica and to the human interaction in Antarctica. And I actually want to start by reading a quotation, which is my personal favorite quotation. It's by a chap called Rob Mose Brown, who was the botanist on the Scottish Antarctic expedition of 1902. The quotation is, "There is, I feel sure, no region in the world more grand in its scenery than the Antarctic, and no place more transcendent in its beauty. It's a vast wonderland laid out on a giant scale, in which littleness has no place, but its very vastness no less than its beauty, while it quickens a traveller's daily wonder and deepens his relevance, forces him to feel that it's a world he can never conquer, a world in which the forces of nature are too tremendous to overcome, and must resignedly be bowed before in the hope that they will suffer him to come and pass again unscathed." Now, Rob Mose Brown was down as part of an expedition to establish a base. And just to give a little call back to what His Excellency was talking about, the base that was established by the Scottish was then taken over by the Argentinians. It's a base that is now known as Orchidas on Laurie Island in the South Orkneys, and it is indeed the longest continuously operated base in Antarctica, and the place that we have the longest series of time series data on climate changes from. Now, for a long, long time, the view that humans had of Antarctica was that it was this great monolithical organization, almost a castle of ice, a fortress that we had to go in and we had to adapt ourselves to. And that's still the case, but it's become increasingly apparent over the last few decades that while Antarctica itself does have this very, very hostile environment to it, our impacts globally are now starting to impact upon that environment itself as well, and it's proving to be a lot more fragile than we might once have believed. The changes that we're starting to see down in Antarctica are dramatic and very, very worrying in terms of what it could mean for global warming. And I think there's a number of things that we should be looking and viewing Antarctica as, both as a warning, but also as a possibility that we might be able to change the direction that our planet is going and the direction that we are going as a species. And I think that is one of the most important lessons that we can draw from Antarctica. And I would argue that the presence of tourism down there is a very direct way in which that message can be passed to people, so that the way that we behave back in our day-to-day lives, the way that we choose to act, does have a direct impact on Antarctica in a way that we maybe not realize. And I think that can only really come about through the presence of tourism and tourist operations in Antarctica. I think that's probably as far as I want to go now, and Hannah's back, so I'm going to suggest we hand back to her, and she can continue her part, and I'll shut up for a bit.
Thank you so very much, Danny, for coming on sort of unintroduced. I apologize for that. But perhaps I can take care of that a little bit later when I'm introducing Laura as well. But Hannah, if you are able to continue, do share your slides, please, and do continue. Thank you.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that. It's yes, you'd think in West Yorkshire in England we'd have better connection, but we sometimes seem to not. So yeah, yeah. So I was obviously just talking about how we maintain protection of all of the environment and the species in Antarctica, and we give a lot of information to our passengers before we head out. One of the really fundamental things, and it's just sort of just makes it quite easy is that we have a 5-meter rule, so we don't approach the birds and the mammals closer than 5 meters. And it's become particularly important with a bird flu that unfortunately has spread around the globe. It's a very invasive pathogen that unfortunately doesn't just affect birds. It's actually affecting the marine mammals more, the seals in Antarctica more than it's actually affecting the bird life, it seems, although some of the birds have been dying, so skewers. It doesn't seem to affect penguins, which is amazingly, is really good, but it just seems to be a virus that is gone worldwide and is causing huge problems in the northern hemisphere and now in the southern hemisphere as well. And we were being extremely cautious and careful this past Antarctic season to make sure that we really maintained very, very strict protocols for that. So we were making sure that people kept their distances from the wildlife even more than normal. We didn't put anything on the ground, so if people had a bag, they had to have it with them on their person. We asked people to not sit on the ground at all, or lie down or kneel and crouch even, just so that people were upright, because we have really, really good protocols for cleaning boots and cleaning footwear. But obviously, if you have to clean entire bodies and kind of bags as well, it becomes more tricky than that. So before we go ashore, we do a full kind of cleaning up. This is actually on the ship, showing some of the biosecurity measures that we take prior to going ashore in Antarctica. We make sure that there are no seeds in people's bags that can drop out and be on shore. So we literally go very carefully through every bit of equipment that people are going to take on shore with them. And we scrub their boots. We have a Virkon, which is a biocide of an antiviral substance, and we make sure that all of the boots are clean. And we do this prior to going ashore, but then between every landing as well. So we have pressure washers and scrubbers on the ship. And so as soon as people come back from shore, from being out in environment, we clean their boots with the water, with these scrubbers, and then we have a little Virkon bath that people walk through, and we do this each time as well. And then when we're in Antarctica, we have a lot of guidelines that we follow, and these are all the sort of Antarctic Treaty environmental guidelines that we just sort of summarize and use as well. And so we have guidelines for wildlife watching generally, like I said, the sort of keeping a distance, making sure that we don't go near concentrations of birds on ice. You can see, and all of the guide team get to see this. We have very strict guidelines for whale watching, both with the ship and with our Zodiacs, with the small boats that we take people ashore with. And then a lot of the landing sites that we visit have very specific kind of guidelines and visitor site guidelines that protect the environment. So protect nesting birds, they'll protect glaciated areas, and so we have these sort of all this information that as a guide team we know about, and we pass it on to our passengers, and make sure that they sort of follow the best practice basically. So we'll have guided routes, we'll have sort of flagged routes on shore to make sure that people don't stray into areas that are protected or more vulnerable, and just really work on that a lot. But it does mean that we still have these amazing encounters, and sometimes the wildlife will visit us. These are some Antarctic orca killer whales visiting the side of the ship. And we slow the ship, we stop the ship, and then we sort of move away very carefully. We have a sort of half an hour period that we can watch things for up close, and then we sort of move away from them so that we don't disturb their natural behavior as well. And then one of the things that we do to kind of try to engage people and also to assist with the science in Antarctica is that because we're going there trip after trip, season after season, we've worked out that as an industry, the passengers can actually help get really vital scientific data as well. So we have a citizen science program, and this engages people directly with Antarctica and with science, but it's also incredibly helpful for the scientists that we work through. And as I say, there is a sort of lack of knowledge. There's not that many, there are the scientific stations, and people have been studying in Antarctica since, the last since the beginning of the 19th century. But it's still very, very remote. And as travelers, as tourist ships, we're increasing. There's more ships going there, but we can get all this information. And we have the data that's been gathered has already informed policy. And one of the things that's actually happened is that we've got a slowdown zone for whales in the regions of Antarctica that are most visited. So the Antarctic Peninsula region, I don't know if you can see the cursor there, is very heavily trafficked, especially this area called the Gerlache Strait, and it's an amazing environment for whales. There's been an incredible success since the moratorium on whale hunting in the 1980s. There's been no hunting of humpback whales or any whales other than for sort of science and a very small amounts of hunting. And it just means that actually the numbers of humpback whales has increased. I've actually witnessed it in my 20 years of going to Antarctica. This astonishing increase in the number of animals, which is absolutely fantastic. But it does mean that they are, there is the potential for ship strikes with the number of animals. But we now have a 10-knot speed limit in these particular geofence sort of areas that are really, really populated by the whales. And this was because of the projects of citizen scientists monitoring and seeing where the whales were. And we've also, we submit our whale flukes, so the scientists were getting more and more data about the actual numbers of whales from fluke sightings and re-sightings of whale flukes. So it's really amazing sort of bit of success just over the last sort of 10 years, really. With the citizen science, and then there's a very elaborate project with the field phyto, and this is actually looking at the increase in the change in the phytoplankton in the fields where there's more meltwater because the glaciers are retreating and there's more meltwater coming in. And this project is monitoring the kind of changes in phytoplankton, which is the sort of building block of the Antarctic ecosystem, the little micro plants. So yeah, there's been a really good long-term study on that. And Antarctica generally just sort of changes people. You go there and it is so incredibly beautiful and astonishing. And there is just the sort of general, with what you get to see when you visit, it does make you kind of really aware of how fragile the planet is and the ecosystem is. And that's, from the wildlife, so like the orcas. And then these personal encounters can just really sort of make people totally, well, it can sort of change you and be astonishing. This is actually a minke whale that's visited every boat, and it was sort of just an incredible and joyous experience to see this, but it also, just can make people very, very aware of the environment. And one of the things we try and encourage people to do is to become an Antarctic ambassador. So they will then educate others by sharing their experiences of Antarctica, and advocate for Antarctica, and just advocate generally, and then also try to make positive changes at home, and to mitigate the effects of climate change as well. And so basically anyone can become an Antarctic ambassador. You don't actually have to have visited Antarctica, but it's obviously once people have, they really are very aware of that as well. And there's a sort of ambassador challenge, and it's just a way to try to get people to, go meat free if they can, to reduce their use of energy, reduce their car use, maybe sort of, just generally. And it's, you can have like a little challenge card that's been set up so you can kind of score yourself and with education as well and advocacy. And I know that Laura will talk more about this, and we've already talked a bit about Antarctica. The climate is changing more rapidly than anywhere else on the planet. The warming is real, and it is the kind of the peninsula region particularly seems to be one of the areas that's warming the most as well. And so we do have to be aware of that. And there has been some quite dramatic glacial carvings and loss of some of the very, very large ice shelves recently, some really, really dramatic. There was a really dramatic loss, breakup of the Lawson B ice shelf in 2002. And then the Wilkes ice shelf and also the Mony ice shelf. So there's been some carvings of some absolutely enormous icebergs. And perhaps you've seen in the press, there was a large iceberg, and it actually was carved in 1986. So the actual event where this iceberg carved was incredibly long time ago, but it was then stuck in the Weddell Sea in amongst the sea ice and trapped. But then as the sea ice was melting, and the iceberg became sort of freer, it had got grounded, and then it kind of melted away a bit. And so at the moment, it's the largest iceberg in the world at the moment, and it really just started moving in at the beginning of 2023, in January of 2023, and then it came out of the Weddell Sea in the beginning of the Antarctic season, which is the sort of spring, November time. And it came out into the circumpolar current and is heading sort of towards South Georgia, in the South Atlantic Ocean. We were lucky enough to see it on one of the cruises. This is actually a satellite image of it. It's a little bit difficult to see, but this is the iceberg, and these are some of the islands at the top of the Antarctic Peninsula. And this iceberg is, about 70 kilometers long, so it's just absolutely gigantic. This is the view of the iceberg from the ship, and it just looks like an ice shelf, but this is actually the iceberg stretching for 40 nautical miles when we saw it. And off it there was a carved iceberg with penguins on it as well. But an amazing sight, and something you'll never remember, never forget seeing. And Yusuf mentioned this, that we were able to, we stopped and we were able to scoop a cup that had gone overboard just with a net, but we then launched a Zodiac to pick up this barrel that we saw floating by the iceberg. It was quite choppy water, and this is the team that did the barrel rescue, and you can see that they're very pleased with themselves that they were able to pull this barrel out of the water and bring it back. And whenever we see marine debris, if we have a chance, we will pick it up. We sometimes find the floating buoys in the water and other bits of marine plastic netting as well, even in Antarctica, because there is some fishing there as well. We were able to rescue this some of this marine debris that was near these penguins. These are chinstrap penguins on an iceberg. And so, Antarctica is amazing. It's beautiful, and we want to keep it that way as much as we can. And although the visitor numbers are increasing, there is a real effort to educate people and to really maintain Antarctica as best we can. Yeah, that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so very much, Hannah, for giving us a window into the work you do. I'm sure that those of us watching and listening, extremely envious about the experiences you've had dealing with penguin, dealing with orca, and I'm sure in the north dealing with polar bears as well, as all the marine mammal life at both ends of the planet, as it were. But thank you so much for sharing this. And don't worry about the technical glitches. They do happen anytime we are going virtual like this. I'd like to also thank Danny properly for stepping in without an introduction. But you can read about Danny in the climate governance webpage on this event. Basically, He's a history and science lecturer, and as well as another expedition leader for Antarctica, and is a diving instructor, has worked in many parts of the world. I'm sure if he had more time, he too could share a host of experiences. We need to move into the panel discussion part of the this evening's event. I'd like to welcome Ms. Laura Mony, who's a geologist and a glaciologist. I think very importantly, an expedition leader also in Antarctica. Well, she, once again, born in France, grew up in the French part of Canada, and has expertise in marine and Antarctic science. So welcome very much, Ms. Laura Mony. If you could spend a little bit of time sharing with us your experiences and concerns with respect to the impact of climate on the wide continent. Laura, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I feel really honored to be here. Sorry. I think Anna's presentation was really good to tackle what's happening in Antarctica to protect it as itself, but I think it's also important to realize that Antarctica has a global impact. And it's not only what's happening down south or even in the Arctic, but everything is connected. And it's something when we go down to those regions, like we keep saying, it is an amazing place. It is such a beautiful place, but it's also one of the most fragile environments in the world. Like you said, my background is in climate science, especially focused on Antarctica. So I've seen some changes since I started going down in the peninsula. I've been working here only for the last 7 years, and even in 7 years, I've been seeing massive change. If you want some few numbers about how Antarctica has been impacted by the change in the climate, if we look at the peninsula right now, 87% of the glacier are melting. It means that there's been a retreat in those glaciers, and we see every year some of the glacier that we used to see that are retreating and seeing the impact in the environment. But also it's kind of a thing is that Antarctica, it's so isolated, so you feel that it's so far away from the rest of the world, but it's actually the first contributor to sea level rise with Greenland. And I think that's really important to keep that in mind when you go down there, is that, yes, you witness one of the most beautiful environment in the world, but it's also the base of all the oceanic currents, and all those oceanic currents start in Antarctica and the Arctic. And if there's changes over there, there will be changes in your region. Even in Malaysia, you'll see changes in your ocean just by what's happening down in Antarctica. So I'll just go quickly about that, about sea level. I know we hear in the news some kind of worrying numbers and some big numbers. Yes, Antarctica holds 60 meters of water if everything melts, which probably won't happen anytime in the future. But if we look at the last IPCC report, so the IPCC is the International Panel for Climate Change, and they release a report every 4 years. And they do a lot of modeling about how Antarctica will impact sea level rise. And if we look at the last IPCC report, they say depending on the scenario, the sea level rise contribution of the Antarctic ice sheet will be between 9.2 centimeters to 40 centimeters. And I think that's really important to see how massive a difference is. 9.2 centimeters is easy to mitigate than 40 centimeters. And that's where we have to make changes, is because if we do enough, we can able to mitigate what's happening. And if we look at the industry, because I work as a guide and I go down in Antarctica every year, so I see the difference. I think our way of making a difference is to be a witness of what's happening, but also to teach a lot. I think we have a really big role into informing the public about all those changes and how quick it's happening and how fragile it is an environment, but also to inspire those people then when they come back home to make changes in their everyday life. And I think Danny really tackled it really well. It means that it's not only traveling to Antarctica and witnesses what's happening, but it's also going back home and finding a way of influence what's happening in the whole world. Like climate change doesn't have any border. It doesn't stop where a country stops. It is really a global problem. So we need to find a global solution. And the tourists are here to protect Antarctica as its own, but it's also to be inspired of going home and really make some changes. So I think it's a really quick introduction to climate change. I think you can do a full presentation about it. But yeah, the main thing you have to realize is the impact of the tourists has some good and bad side. Of course, we're a contribution to those to this problem, to the amount of carbon dioxide released in the atmosphere, but we're also the best witnesses. And when we go back home, we have to talk about it. We have to present it. And I think Yusuf, by just putting us together, it is a really best way to do it, is really to inform the rest of the world about what's happening. And that's our best way to contribute to the solution, I think. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so very much, Laura. It's a pleasure to have you. And once again, you know, we would like to welcome any questions from the floor. We have been able to bring these distinguished personalities together. Their collective experience, I'm sure, is extremely valuable. Since there are no questions in the Q&A, perhaps I would like to extend the question. You partially answered the question already, Laura, by saying that in the 7 years that you've worked there, you've been able to see some changes. And I'd like to perhaps ask some of the other experts, Hannah and Danny, have you been able to see changes in your respective areas? Of course, Laura is dealing with the glaciers, but with the other wildlife, for example, have you seen any changes there?
Yes, I'll give a quick response to that. There's been some notable changes. One of the islands that we occasionally visit is a place called Petermann Island. It's a little bit further south of the Gerlache region, so it's one that doesn't get visited as much as maybe some of the better known sites. Now, when I first went down there in 2006, when we went to Petermann, there's a very large penguin population there, and predominantly back in those days, it was Adelie penguins. Now, if you go to Petermann these days, it's predominantly Gentoo penguins. So it's two different species. Now, one of the things that is unusual about, or rather the difference between the two species, is that Adelies tend to be much more dependent on krill populations for feeding. Gentoos are far more Catholic. They'll eat pretty much anything that goes past, and so the availability of food for the Adelies is much more predicated on the availability of the krill populations. Now, a little bit further north of that is another island called Torgerson Island, which is being studied by a nearby US base called Palmer. And what they did on Torgerson was very interesting. They separated the population there into two halves. One half they allowed tourists to go and visit, the other half they did not. And what they were looking was to see whether or not there was a difference in the breeding success rate between the two sides. They didn't find anything that correlated. You know, they couldn't see any immediate obvious impact on the tourists visiting to the places where the tourists weren't visiting. But there was a difference in terms of the successful breeding over the seasons, as you'd expect. And they did a little bit of digging, and they correlated that to changes in the sea ice around it, around the island during the winter. Now, sea ice is something that when I was at the base on Rothera, sea ice was one of the projects that we were working on, and we've got sea ice records for Rothera now for going back 40, 50 years. And the correlation that the scientists at Palmer observed was that when the sea ice was poor, the breeding success of the Adelie penguins dropped. And that's because the sea ice is a vital part of the krill nursery grounds. It's where the young krill basically grow up when they're from larvae gradually until they reach maturity. And therefore, if you don't get much sea ice, you get a drop in the krill populations. And that of course, hits the Adelie populations. That's not the case with the Gentoos, because they are able to eat far wider. So nowadays, if you visit Petermann, you'll find it pretty much all Gentoos, whereas 20 years ago, it would have been pretty much all Adelies. Han, you've been visiting a similar length of time. You probably have something of that nature as well.
Yeah, I've actually witnessed that. I've seen that change for myself. The Gentoos are heading further south. So there's another little island group further south from there, called the Yalors, and the Gentoos are starting to nest on there as well, which they didn't previously. And yeah, so it's that kind of change. Yeah, we've definitely noticed, as well as just personally seeing the glaciers going back as well. Yeah.
Yeah, the glacial retreat is obvious. Another one of the things that we were doing down at Rothera was there was a glacier very close to the base I was working on, and one of my mates down there was a chap called David Vaughan, who was with the British Antarctic Survey. He was a glaciologist. Unfortunately, he's dead now. But me and him went out to go and look at this glacier, and he told me that it's retreated by over 1 kilometer in a decade. Which is a dramatic rate of decrease. You know, there's an incredible amount of recession on that one glacier, and as Laura says, we're seeing that sort of dynamic is occurring really across the whole of the northern end of the peninsula.
And I think also another thing we've been noticing, and I think Anna and Danny even more than me, is the change in the weather. When we started in the industry, hearing rain in summer was a bit of a myth. And even if we had some nice weather, we never had some wet weather. And now it's pretty much the norm to get a lot of rain during summer. So it's something you can see shifting, where you see that in the peninsula, because it's so far up north compared to the rest of Antarctica, the weather changes are quite, can be quite impressive in even one season, where you go through almost like a summer way too early and then winter back and then summer. So I think that's also something, in the point of view of a glaciologist, is something that really you notice quite easily.
And there's just more precipitation generally, even the snowfall. The season before last, so the 22-23 season, the amount of snow was unbelievable at the beginning of the season. And it has an incredibly detrimental effect on the penguin breeding success, because they just get waterlogged. Their nest sites, they can't breed unless they've got bare rock, the peninsula species, the 3 species there. And it was particularly obvious the season before last, with just so much snowfall. And that is, you know, something that's happening as well. It's the rain definitely, but also more precipitation generally. And so that is having an effect directly on some of the wildlife.
Yeah. It's interesting. You know, things that we wouldn't think about at all. I mean, we look at the documentaries that we can see, and we talk about nesting, and we talk about you know, keeping eggs on feet and things like that, but we seldom think that something as simple as excess snow might cause waterlogging on what we would otherwise see as you know, either a snowbank itself or rock. You've talked about the krill already impacting penguin. Does that continue to move up the food web? Does that impact the larger carnivores that feed on different types of penguin? And perhaps another question too, that you talked about, that giant iceberg that's now sort of, you know, exited via the circumpolar current, and the calf, as you point out, has penguin on it. You know, what's the fate of penguin like these who are marooned, even though they're on something enormous? Ultimately, you know, they're going to hit warmer water, and the iceberg's going to melt. I mean, do you think they'll jump off and swim back? People like us wonder about these things. Perhaps you could shed some light. Anyone? Thank you.
Yeah, they do jump off. So the chin straps, it's a particular type of penguin. The chin strap penguins, they seem to really like to rest on icebergs, and they do definitely get to a certain point where they're.
Oh, I think we've lost Hannah again.
Oh dear, again.
Yeah.
Would anyone be able to pick up on it?
Yeah, I can take over a little bit, but yeah, the penguins, those penguins in general, are really adapted to, they're marine mammals, so they will jump off and go back to Antarctica. So that's not really something we worry about when we just find them really cute and entertaining. But when you talk about those massive icebergs, the crazy thing is now they hit the news, but they've been around for a really long time. And like Hannah pointed out, there's more and more of them right now, but like the one we saw was from 1986. So it is a natural process to see iceberg around. But yeah, I think in the next few years, we'll see more of them being pushed out into the ocean, because they are not as sheltered in Antarctica anymore as they used to.
I think one of the other factors with actually, if we can go to the krill question first. Sorry, Gary, what was your exact question about the krill?
Well, you did mention that the krill, the presence of krill, is a marker for the presence of the penguins. You mentioned that the Adelies do require the krill. And of course, a lot of other animals feed on krill as well, including whales. The baleen whales. I'm just wondering if what's starting at that point in the food web, the krill, has knock-on impacts apart from just the penguins. Do they get up to the larger megafauna, the mammals and seals and other mammals that feed off of this food web? It just shed some light on the possible impact of starting something as simple as krill probably feed on phytoplankton as well.
But I mean the trophic levels in Antarctica are not terribly complex. The food web is a sort of fairly simple one. So at the bottom, you do have the phytoplankton. Then you've got the krill and other zooplankton which feed on those. Then you've got pretty much everything else will feed on krill, either, well, predominantly directly by eating it itself, and then occasionally you'll get other things like, for instance, leopard seals, which may take a penguin, which of course is eating the krill too. So I mean, the krill population levels are fundamental to the food web in Antarctica and to much of the macrofauna that we see down there. Now, we'd have to be a little bit careful with this. It is very difficult to study krill, and so we don't really have a good feel for how the krill populations have changed over the decades. But the fact that we are seeing a decrease in the quality of the sea ice would necessarily tend to lead us to suspect that that is going to impact upon the levels of krill as well. There is a slight dichotomy with the sea ice in that you've probably seen reports that the sea ice is expanding, it's getting wider. That's true, but it's not just about the extent of it, the air of it's about the quality of it. And what we see, and this is pretty much every study that's being done on sea ice from every place that's studying it around the peninsula, that sea ice is degraded. The thickness of it is getting thinner, and therefore its longevity, its long-lasting, the period of time it lasts within the environment is decreasing as well. So the fact that it's expanding is not necessarily a good sign. It's an indication, again, of a change that we don't fully understand yet, but does seem to be linked to climate change. One of the reasons that's been hypothecated for the expansion is that because we're seeing an increase in winds being driven off the peninsula, off the continent rather, so pushing out the sea ice from the continent, that's leading to that expansion. And of course, if that continues, then that extent will continue. And inevitably, if you're taking a thin layer of ice and you're stretching it over a wider area, you get a thinner layer of ice and a thinner layer of ice and a thinner layer of ice. And of course, if that is your fundamental feeding ground for one of the primary sources of food in the region, that's going to impact on that.
Thank you so much, Danny, for that explanation. Hannah, thanks. Welcome back. Did you want to pick up sort of where you were at?
I think I'm pretty much, I'm sorry. I have no idea why it keeps dropping out. It's, just to say what Danny, I mean, the other thing that happens, of course, is that the krill swarms shift around anyway, and so the wildlife follows them, so there's some seals that are very specifically eat krill as well directly, and in fact leopard seals, 50% of their diet is krill. Although they're eating the penguins, they're eating fish as well. But the wildlife definitely seems to shift. But this sort of oddnesses that it's just starting to look at. So things like minke whales that seem to be declining a little bit. And it's not sure. And it might just be because the humpbacks have increased so much that's creating a kind of odd things as well, because it's so difficult to know, because you kind of get this snapshot of where we are right now with the wildlife, but they do follow the krill swarms, so things are moving a bit south. If the krill moves south, the wildlife will move with it.
We are approaching the time where we do need to stop, and I do see that there's still no questions. I'm sure it's not because people aren't interested. It's just that what you've been talking about is so deeply enthralling, and And you know, it's a bit of a universe away from what many of us experience. Perhaps trying to bring it back in. I was quite fascinated to learn about the challenge card. That sort of the you know, people who visited Antarctica you know, are sort of charged with being ambassadors for Antarctica. In your opinion, and you know, we had a quick glance at the card and all the various you know, sort of steps we could take, some small, some bigger, to try to reduce the impact. In your views, is that having any impact? Given the number of people who visited, given the fact that they go home and spread the news from this, how does it look? Do you feel optimistic about this? Is it something that you know, is gaining traction among specific parts of the population, maybe among young people? Is it something that you take to grade schools, primary schools, and things like that? Perhaps you could help us understand a bit of that. Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah.
Go ahead, Anna.
No, you go. I've spoken.
Yeah, that's if I get started a little bit on that, it's really hard to measure the impact when people go back home, because it is how it is. There's quite a bit of study about it, and it's social science, and so I think social science really is different factors, so it's really hard to say. But in my perspective, especially when you're on the ship, I think just by inspiring one person or two, that's something in science we call the positive feedback effect, and it's that loop of, if you inspire one person, then when they go back home, they have a bigger impact on like the rest of their community. So it's hard. It's almost impossible to say if it has changes, but you need to stay optimistic. I think that's the most important thing. You need to keep doing what you're doing, because if you stop, you know, it won't be any impact. So I think it's better to see it this way than trying to measure anything.
Well,
but that's my
Hannah?
point of view.
Yeah. Hannah?
Yeah, I think one of the critical things to remember about Antarctica is that it is still a functional part of the Earth that we have. And the reality is, if we want as a species to preserve Antarctica and indeed the Arctic, we have to preserve the planet that we're living on. We can't save one without saving the other. And I think one of the advantages that we have with what we do is because it is so clear in Antarctica. I mean, it is visible, as I think we've already established. Just in the course of a short lifetime, we can see these changes occurring before our very eyes. It is easier to transfer that knowledge and that understanding to the people that we have on board the ships. And therefore, not everyone's going to change the way they live, and not everyone can make all the changes that would necessarily be needed. But if we can get a few people to change their ways, that, as we can see, that can snowball when they get back to, for want of a better phrase, the real world. And that, I think, is one of the most important lessons, one of the most important things that we can encourage on the ships.
I do have a question from Lim Wan Yi, who asks, what would be the implication of melting ice caps on the flow of the oceanic quote-unquote rivers and tidal patterns? I think she's talking about the thermohaline circulation system. If we lost the ice caps, what would we have?
Yeah, I can jump on that. In terms of tidal patterns, it wouldn't change anything, because this is a moon-Earth effect. So that's not, it's not affected by the change in the ocean. But in terms of what they call the oceanic river, which are those main currents that are circulating the world, it will have a massive impact. Like I said, that what we call the conveyor belt, or that thermohaline current, start in the Arctic and Antarctica. And with the ice melting, the composition of the water is changing, which means that there's way less salty water, and that those layering are the reason we have that current. So if we lose that layering, it would slow down the current, and because of that, those rivers will change pattern. And a good example we have right now is the Gulf Stream, which is in the northern hemisphere, is that current that goes from North America to Europe, and I explain why Europe is warmer than Quebec. And that Gulf Stream has been slowing down, and there is data about it, and it is intricately linked to what's happening in the Arctic and Antarctica. So If I answer the question briefly, the melting of the ice cap would affect that conveyor belt and will affect those what we call oceanic river. So for sure, yeah.
Thank you so much. We'll also have another question, and this may or may not be something that you are able to answer. The question is, what's the estimated area of the world that would be submerged if we had rising sea levels, as mentioned, 9 the question says 9, I think cm
to 40
to
centimeters,
40 cm,
yeah.
Centimeters, yeah.
Well, it's really varied. There are actually maps online if people are interested. You can find website where they do those kind of modelization. You can just write the amount of sea level rise and it will show you what's covered. In terms of 9 centimeters, it will be mostly the coastline. Some of the major cities in the coastline will be quite affected because they are at sea level. And if we go for 40 centimeters, then you think about the islands in the Pacific Ocean will probably completely disappear, or also Australia will be majorly impacted because it's quite of a flat country. But it's really country specific. If we think of Malaysia, where you are coming from, it will be even 9 centimeters would have a major impact. We think of Kuala Lumpur, that city is literally at sea level right now. But if they're interested, there are some websites, just write online and you'll find some modelization
Thank
of
you
the
so
area
much,
that will be
Laura.
affected.
Yeah. Would anyone like to add to that? Yeah, please.
Can I
Danny.
jump in on that? Because there's another factor that is also we're only really recently becoming aware of. This is a lot of work has been done by a chap called Bill Maguire, who's I think at the University of Leeds in London, and Leeds rather in the UK. And he's written a book on it, which I think is called Waking the Giant. It's something along those lines. Now, of course, the volume of ice that we have creates a huge mass. I mean, the mass of the ice that is overlying Antarctica and Greenland up in the north is immense, and it's so big that it squashes down, it pushes down the continental plates that it's resting on top of. And of course, as that decreases, those continental plates will start to rise in the magma that's floating around the underside of the planet, of the Earth. And that, of course, will lead to more tectonic activity and more disruption as that occurs as well. So it's not solely down to the amount of the fact that there may, for instance, be water where the Strand in London is. We may also see increased tectonic activity on the planet as a result, and there is evidence to support that. It's work again that we're only really starting. One of the things I remember being told by one of the geologists I first worked with is that at the moment we, the human species, are carrying out the biggest experiment we've ever done. It's on a global scale, and we don't have a control for it, and we don't have any real idea about where we're going to end up.
Thank you so much for adding that. Yes, this rebound is going to be to have impacts that we still don't understand yet. Anything else to add, Hannah?
No, it's just been a real pleasure to be part of this, and yeah, I'm sorry about my technical challenges, but yeah, I hope people gained some information and insights, and thank you so much.
Yeah, I have from my end, I've learned an enormous amount just in the last hour and a half, and I'm sure that everyone has as well. And I don't see there any more. Wait, is there another question? Oh, no, that's it. We don't seem to have any more questions, but on behalf of everyone who's attended, on behalf of Climate Governance Malaysia, I would like to express our deepest appreciation, gratitude for you taking time out of your busy schedules to share your experiences with us. The rest of us looking at these images can only marvel at the sort of majesty, the scale, or the loss of scale. Perhaps sometimes that when we look at these images, we just can't comprehend how big the things are that we're looking at, and they are really magnificent. And in explaining how the web of life works down there and how it's linked to what we do in our everyday lives, I think it's been an invaluable experience. So once again, a big note of thanks from us at Climate Governance Malaysia, to Hannah, to Danny, to Laura, and of course to His Excellency Manuel Jose Salas. It's been a wonderful pleasure having you. It's been terribly interesting listening to you and learning from you. And I do hope that I wish you lots of safe trips to an unspoiled Antarctica in the future. With that, thank you all very, very much. Thank all of you for joining us for this webinar, and look forward to seeing you again at our next one. Thank you very, very much. Have a good evening, good morning, good afternoon. See you again. Bye-bye.